music history students. Starting this video, I can really only say that my heart goes out to all of you who are working so hard at sandbagging. I personally can't even imagine what it's like to cancel classes in order to have to save your school. So really, kudos to you for taking such pride in where you go to school and in your community. That really is quite inspiring. And you should all be really proud of yourselves. And because of that, I certainly understand the need to lighten the load, especially, well, only actually, on the in-class students who are participating in helping their community, So I can't, if there is a good reason for, lightening the load in college, that would be the best one that I could think of. So I wanted to take this opportunity to talk about something that we are really overdue for a conversation on, and that's the topic of modulatory devices in particularly the 18th century, but it does stretch back a little bit to the 17th century. Of course, we're going to be talking about modulatory devices in the classical period because that's what we're studying now. But just to preface this a little bit, I often quote from a book by Knut Ibsen, who was a very famous music historian. He wrote a lot of textbooks, but probably the one that he was most famous for was his counterpoint, the polyphonic vocal style of the 16th century, which essentially was an analysis of the works of Palestrina. And in the end of the book, he poses a question of who has the greater lasting influence. Was it Palestrina or was it Bach? And the reason why he poses that question is because we know from history that a great deal of the classical composers, well, actually not even classical composers, into the Romantic era studied the textbook by Fuchs, which was the Greta ad Parnassum, right? Which was more or less a detailed account of Palestrina's compositional style. Although recent scholarship has said that Fuchs was not really dead on as far as his analysis of Palestrina's style. That being said, it certainly had a great deal of influence on, we know for a fact, Beethoven and Haydn, right? However, Bach clearly went a lot further in counterpoint, right? And Bach, in the Baroque era, was able to kind of codify the idea, or the ideas, this was all noted in the textbook, so we don't really need to rehash this, of regional styles. Anyway, we'll move on from that. But after reading, chapter 15 in the Dr. Hanning text, our textbook, we also know that Johann Christian Bach was a great influence on Mozart, and that through him, he was able to assimilate ideas of Johann Sebastian Bach, right? So there is an immediate lineage there of Bach to the classical era, right, that we have to consider. If we were to leave that out, we would not have nearly as complete an understanding of the classical era, right? So that being said, that's my preface to this. There are a great deal of harmonic devices in Bach that relate very well to the classical period, and I'll show you that in a little bit. In order to talk about modulation in classical music, we really have to be able to define chord functions, right? The function of chords. Now, for those of you who have already been through your 4 semesters of music theory, this will really be review for you, and you can stop watching now. Although I hope I might say something original. Okay, so now a lot of you learned, defining terms for the notes of a scale, right? Such as tonic, then, supertonic, mediant, subdominant, dominant, submediant. Wait a minute. Oh, I think I messed that up. Anyway, I haven't had to use those in a little bit. Anyway, leading tone, tonic, right? But when you get down to it, there's really only 3 functions, according to some theoreticians. And this is certainly the case according to jazz theoreticians, although it works in classical music as well. And that's the idea that there are really only 3 chord functions. There are tonic chord functions, there are subdominant chord functions, and then there are dominant chord functions, right? So we're going to go over those first. and we're going to use the key of C, just because, you know, that's easiest. Okay, the tonic chords, in order of tonic to least tonic, are the 1 chord, in this case C chord. The 6 chord is still tonic, but is less tonic than the 1 chord. And then the 3 chord, which is the least tonic of the 3 tonic chords. Okay? The subdominant chords are the 2 chord and the 4 chord. Okay? And then we have the dominant chords, which are the 5 chord and the 7 chord. Now, the 7 chord is really a special case. We can really, with the exception of a 7 diminished 7, right, which would be, you know, I'll play it down there, it sounds a little bit better. The 7 chord, with the exception of the 7 diminished 7, is really an extension of the 5 chord. You know, that's why the 5-7 works so well to create that resolution back to the tonic, or any tonic chord, okay? So maybe I am saying something new for you, because you say, what? You know, the 6 chord is not a tonic chord. The tonic chord refers to the 1 chord. Well, that's true. But when we think about tonic in its broader sense as being coming to a point of rest, right, then the 1 chord, the 6 chord, and the 3 chord all work, you know, to varying degrees of successfulness. So here are the rules, if there were any rules in music, okay? The tonic chords can move anywhere, and anything can move to the tonic, right, with some exception, and I'll show you those later. The subdominant chords can move anywhere, meaning that they could move either to a tonic or the dominant, right? But the dominant chord's function is really only to get back to the tonic, or a tonic of some kind, and that's where this whole kind of jazz and classical ideal overlap, because in classical music we have very frequently deceptive cadences, right? You know, meaning that if I were to play, just like kind of improvise a hymn real quick, and I play... Okay, now I landed on the 6 chord, and that is our deceptive cadence, okay, the 5 to the 6. By way of the 6 chord, which is tonic, I can get to a subdominant, let's say 2, and subdominant, right, goes to a dominant of some kind. I'm going to use the 5-7. Okay, right? And it all sounds very logical, because I was more or less following the rules of that tonic, subdominant, dominant relationship. Now, on to our big subject of modulation.